Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
But students, as a matter of fact, in our Catholic tradition right now, take peer ministry to be a very broad term. So a lot of them do it simply by presence. It's by being there, so that's giving someone a shoulder to cry on when they need it.
Today on Reflections, Father Bacik talks with Dr. Norman Gadan, who is director of the University Counseling Center at the University of Toledo. Father Bacik and Dr. Gadan will discuss peer ministry, presence, and outreach. And now, here's Father Bacik.
Norm, it seems like the only time that you really want to be on these programs with me is when you have a book to push. And I mean, I don't think that's really proper, but tell me about the latest book. You're doing something about a self-help book. Would you tell me a little bit about it?
I will, Jim. I'm actually doing two at the moment, and I hope to be invited back to talk about the other one. But the self-help one I know is the one you want me to focus on tonight, so I won't mention the one about parents.
Okay.
Unless you invite me back, and then we could talk about the parents' guide.
When that book comes out, you can come on the program, hold it up for everyone to see,
Good.
And then we'll see how it sells. But
Thanks.
Tell me, please, about the self-help book.
Okay, it's kind of a follow-up to a book that came out in 1982, which was an edited volume of our work on peer counseling at Florida State University. And there we had, through our counseling center, used peer counselors and self-help groups among students in a variety of situations to help them adjust better to college, to help them plan their careers, to help run the student affairs offices, and had quite a large-scale and comprehensive peer counseling program. As a follow-up to that, I was asked to again survey the field and see if we could extend it just a bit in higher education. And what's come out of it is another volume in which I've surveyed the field, tried to describe the selection, the training, the kinds of programming that goes on, then developed a section in which I've tried to figure out, really for myself, why these kinds of programs are so successful and so popular and so widespread on campus today. I've developed some ideas about that have to do with the way students change and develop during college, and I'd be glad to elaborate on it a bit in a few minutes. A third section is designed to say how self-help is being applied so differently, directly in the educational mainstream. If I may say so, that's where your chapter on peer ministry fits in.
And that must be why we're doing this program, Norm, as I can figure.
We're so self-serving,
yes.
But at least we're honest about it and
straightforward.
Right.
And so what I want to talk about with that marvelous lead-in is the question of peer ministry, as we call it these days. And when we use that word ministry, in my own circles, we're thinking about people working out of a religious commitment and being involved in a particular religious organization, and out of that trying to serve other students, trying in one way or another to enhance the life of students, to help them understand their faith better, to help free them up to serve others, and so on. So it is students in peer ministry are those who are interested in trying to make their faith relevant in the world of academe, of trying to take the things that they profess out of their religious heritage and to actually put it into practice by serving others. They usually are to get guidance in this. They often are officially appointed in that regard, and at times at least they are evaluated on how they do it. So just to set a little bit of historical context for all of that in our Catholic circles, there has always been a peer ministry going on here in the United States. In fact, the beginning of the Newman organizations, that's what we call the Catholic student groups on campus, often Newman clubs or gathered around Newman centers and so on, was really begun by students themselves, largely their initiative or the initiative of lay faculty members to try to help the Catholics on campus both preserve their faith and to spread it in various ways. So we've sort of have a long tradition going back into the 19th century of Catholics on campus operating in that fashion. Very often the students have sort of taken hold of this on their own and formed their own organizations and trying to educate themselves. Very often the official church has not given them a great deal of help, although often they've had chaplains to sort of guide them in this. And we're seeing really a renaissance, a rebirth right now of interest in all of this. And that sort of sets the stage for my own interest in this peer ministry question. I think that probably will fit into your book and the overall thing that you're talking about self-help programs for students.
Sounds like it'll fit in perfectly. I'm just curious. You said there's kind of a renaissance in this now. What's involved with that?
Well, I think that in the church as a whole, first of all, we're seeing a growth of interest in lay ministry. Mm-hmm. There was a time when Catholics sort of wanted to sit back and let the priests do it all. That was sort of epitomized at the Mass itself, our major worship service, when the lay people thought of themselves as passive participants, and in which the priest did everything, read the scriptures and run the whole service and preach the sermon and so on. And that modeled, really, much of Catholic life. That is, the priest was supposed to do all of the teaching, or the nuns also, of the young people, do all the visiting of the hospitals and taking communion to the sick. It was very much of a clerically centered church. Now, as a result of the Second Vatican Council, we've had a renewed interest in the role of the laity, and a sense that the lay people are co-responsible for this church, and therefore they have to work at it. They have their own share in it, and they have their own jobs to do.
What we in community mental health might call community involvement or participation.
That's right. Exactly. This very same notion.
Good parallel.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very good parallel, and therefore we again see that modeled in our worship service now, where we would have our students as lay members, and our generally parishes around the country. The lay people would be reading the scriptures and helping to distribute communion and taking communion to the sick, and running the educational programs for the young people. So right now in the Catholic Church there is a great rebirth of interest in lay ministry generally. Mm-hmm. Now what we're seeing is that this is also operative among our student population. So they see their parents doing that kind of thing. They get a little bit of modeling that way, and there is a great emphasis on the campuses to say we want student involvement. We don't want you just dead wood here in this parish. You need to, if you are really going to be a member of this Catholic community, you have to show it by your actions. You expect to give something to the parish as well as take something away from it.
Do you find with your students in your peer ministry anything like this, that the more they tend to be involved with the peer ministry, the more they seem to grow personally, to grow in confidence and competence, and the kinds of things we see in studies of lay students outside of a peer ministry?
Very definitely. Yeah,
real advantages to the students.
You see it clearly. There's all kind of personal growth that goes on. I mean, in some ways they have to. They are called upon to articulate their faith, or to study more about it, or to share it with others. It gives them a greater sense of interest. I mean, I've just watched individual students who have gotten involved in our ministry.
Could you recall a couple of them?
Yeah,
maybe?
Well, I think that I'm thinking of a young man who has been working as a peer minister with us all year long, and it's just marvelous to see the way he has taken hold and continued to grow and mature and become more confident, and to want to project his own interests. You know, he really loves to get up at the worship service and even preach the homily and to witness to the faith there. So it's a marvelous thing to behold, and I believe that in general we see this, that it is a great catalyst for growth. Of course, we know this in general, don't we, in terms of students on campuses, that one of the great predictors of success as a student and of appreciation of the college experience afterwards is the involvement.
Right.
Involvement in all kind of activities.
Exactly. And the other thing that I think fits in here is the idea that students learn so much from each other. Somehow their fellow students, I think, are a temporary bridge on their way from parents and home to later adult life. And if anything, maybe sometimes students, their fellow students are too important to them. But at the least they learn from each other, they test each other out, they model each other's behavior, and I'm sure you see this kind of thing going on in your program. And it also, I think, means a difference for us as professionals, and I was wondering if you notice this for you as priests and for the nuns too. Is there a difference now then in your role vis-a-vis these students and the community involvement? Has it changed your activities in these peer ministry programs?
I think that is it really does happen. In other words, in a lot of places now, the leaders, the staff members or team members of the campus ministry programs find themselves being a minister to the ministers.
Right.
That is, that a lot of it is facilitating and enabling, trying to prepare them to do their job well. That seems to happen when the peer ministry programs are well developed. And that creates a certain problem, incidentally, around the country. That is, some of the priests are beginning to feel as though they're not getting as much hands-on work as they would like to have with the general population.
Sort of less priestly in a way, in some sense?
I would say more in this way, that it is restricted, so that their priestly endeavors all are going to those people who are very involved,
right.
to those who are in the various helping groups, in the study groups, or the outreach programs, or the liturgical groups, and so on. That's who they are ministering to, and it makes a very narrow circle of people, and they wonder when are they going to get in contact with this broader spectrum of the clientele they're supposed to be serving.
Kind of a trade-off or a tension here in a way, because they really are in touch with that broader spectrum, but it's sort of in a pyramid sense. It's through these other peer leaders that they're reaching them, whereas in the old days maybe they reached all these people
directly. That's right.
Maybe that in some ways is still more satisfying or more comfortable to them.
I think it is for many, and there seems to be a new outlook that has to be developed. There's a bishop up in Saginaw, Michigan, Bishop Ken Untner, marvelous bishop and very pastoral fellow, and Bishop Untner says that we should ask our questions as priests, as leaders, not am I visiting the sick or am I educating the children or whatever, but is the ministry to the sick going on in my parish? Is education happening? Is there an outreach to people with drug problems? In other words, is it happening, and not am I doing it? And it really is a very different kind of question. And I think it sets a whole different tone for the thing.
You mentioned to me also that there were several models. I guess what you're describing today is one model or two models of peer ministry. And
well, I would say what we're doing at the moment is talking in general, and what I think we are able to do, Norm, is to look at the broad spectrum of peer ministry that's going on around the country. And I've had a chance to talk to a lot of people in a lot of parts of the country about this. I'm able to discern at least 5 different models of this ministry that's going on, and we might just talk a little bit about those. But, I mean, to give an overview, some of these people are involved in a ministry of presence or outreach. They're trying to reach out to other students. You know, I think that there's other students who are involved in formation or teaching other ones. A whole lot of students are involved, thirdly, in the liturgical ministry. They're lay distributors of communion, or they read the scriptures at the Mass, and so on. And then I think there's another group that's very involved in liberation, that is service to others. They're interested in the social justice causes and trying to create better racial harmony and so on.
Apartheid in Nicaragua and
very much so.
Those kinds of things.
Yes. And then finally, out of the models I'm developing, is that some are involved in building community, directly trying to create greater harmony within the faith community itself. So that's when I begin to look at peer ministry around the country, that's how it divides up to me. And I think we might just take some time here to look at one of these, this whole peer ministry of presence and outreach. In a way, I think we could divide those up. But I mean, somehow they link together in mind. Let me just tell you about a program I've heard about at a Lutheran school. Or no, it might be a state school, but it's a Lutheran-run program. And they're very interested in reaching out to the new Lutheran students who come to campus. So what they do is they train their students, Lutheran students, to be able to go out and visit the new incoming Lutheran freshmen, to invite them to come to the worship service, to befriend them, to try to draw them into the general community that the Lutherans have formed there, and to get them to participate in some of their orientation programs that they have, and to befriend these other students really throughout the whole year. So let's say they train 10 peer ministers at the beginning of the year, or they do it the previous year. And then when the academic year starts, they will then give them the names of the Lutheran students who are coming in, and each, maybe they pick 5 or 10 that they're responsible for. And then during the first weeks of school, they're very encouraged to go out and to contact them, to invite them to the service, to befriend them, and so on. But they are not to do it just as sort of a technique thing, but they're really trying to cultivate a relationship that will last all year.
Right.
So it's not dependent on whether the student actually comes to the
It's
service.
not just
or
orientation week, so to
That's
speak.
right.
It's a year-long.
It's meant to be a year-long friendship, and very often very good friendships do develop out of this. But they really are responsible for this. Now, I think one parish reports, they doubled their attendance at worship services by this particular method. Now, that is an example, as I see it, of this kind of outreach. I could say it in terms of this ministry of presence, too, because a lot of what I've picked up from students is that they think of themselves as ministers even though they're not in a formal program. I did a survey with 500 Catholic college students, and out of that I described I asked the question, first of all, how many of you think of yourself as being involved in a peer ministry program or being peer ministers? Mm-hmm. Well, a good 3/4 of them thought of themselves in that way. But out of the 3/4, many were not in a formal program. They said they did it. Well, I do it by trying to reach out to the other students on my residence hall floor. Or I do it by trying to be a good example to other students.
Somehow service and serving their fellow student
right.
and helping had somehow become very important to them.
They think of that as peer ministry. Now,
Right.
actually, in theological circles, we distinguish two types of things. We distinguish ministry from service. Mm-hmm. And for us, service is a broader term that refers to any kind of outreach or attempt to help others in a broad way. Whereas ministry involves some sort of training, some working out of an active commitment, trying to do it on behalf of the faith community, and trying in some way to build up the kingdom of God in the world. Mm-hmm. So we would technically distinguish this, but students, as a matter of fact, in our Catholic tradition right now, take peer ministry to be a very broad term. So a lot of them do it simply by presence, just by being there, so that's giving someone a shoulder to cry on when they need it.
There's a similar distinction, I guess, in counseling and psychology, in that the peer counselor or the self-help group leader would often, not always, but would often be someone who has been selected and trained and supervised and has some expertise taught to them by a professional or by fellow peer counselors. But it wouldn't just be somebody who conceives of themselves as a peer counselor. Now, that's not a distinction that holds true all the time, but it's somewhat analogous here to your difference between service and the peer ministry. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about your outreach peer ministry, these are individuals who are selected, trained, and specifically motivated to... Mm-hmm.
Right, and then they would be given, one of the important skills, it seems to me, that is needed here is communication. Mm-hmm. So that they know how to do this in a prudent fashion, so that they don't turn people off and browbeat people or try to force them into becoming part of this community, so that they're able to listen well. It seems to me that's an important skill that would be needed along this line. I think that very often the training that I see around the country is perhaps not as good as it should be, but the better programs do put a lot of time into helping these students know how to reach out and how to talk to the others and how to listen.
Would the communication skills training here, and I think you've hit on a point that where there's agreement among almost everybody who selects and trains students for these programs, the communication skills are vital, but would the training for a peer ministry student or a peer minister vary from a student, say, in a lay program in a counseling center or a health service being trained to be a peer counselor or a peer helper?
I think the skills are comparable, and in fact, I think the same general rules would apply. You're going to get a difference finally, probably in the theological area in some way, in the content.
Right.
But I think in terms of the pure skills, I don't believe there is really any difference in this.
I've got a book with me I just happened to bring along tonight because I thought we might talk about these things. And it has a section on nonverbal behavior, eye contact, body posture, head and facial movements, vocal quality, personal habits that may interfere with helping. And then it has another set of what are called continuing responses, responses on the part of the peer minister that might encourage someone to open up and encourage them to talk, as opposed to a judgmental response or "you're wrong" and things that would tend to shut somebody off.
Well,
is that the kind of thing you
have?
Very
helpful. Yes, I think that is definitely needed. I'm very interested in promoting more peer ministry in our own program, and just while you're talking, I can immediately see the value of this. We could have somebody who's skilled in this and come in and talk to our students for about an hour, and talk to them about these kind of skills. Now, Norm, I'd like to know if you're available on Wednesday nights to... no, I won't put you under that pressure right now, but immediately after the program, I'm going to sign you up to do this. No, I think, it is, as someone trained in the psychological area, would be exactly what we would be looking for here, because those skills are comparable.
I think that's what we're saying. There's a general set of skills that would be valuable for peer counselors in lay programs and peer ministers in programs throughout the country in ministry, campus ministry.
Exactly. Now, I think one of the things I see probably more poorly done with a lot of these programs is evaluation and follow-up. And I'm not sure that many of the church groups have found good ways of doing this.
The non-church groups haven't really either, although it's a point that's argued and suggested, and we're all persuaded to do in all the literature on this. There's plenty of room for good follow-up studies, for good studies to prove the effectiveness of these programs, and for new ways to look at it.
Well, let's just design one here. Suppose we have these students who went out and called on the other Lutherans and then tried to befriend them throughout the year. Their job is to stay friends with these students or in contact throughout the year and to invite them. And how would we want to evaluate this?
Well, one way might be to see whether the students who participated in that program showed any different performance during the year in terms of grades or selection of courses, or in terms of what seems to be very important in universities today is retention. Did they tend to stay and register the next quarter or the next semester? Were their grades any higher than comparable students who didn't participate? Did they tend to involve themselves more and hence get a lot more out of the college experience? That'd be one thing. We could compare them with, it'd be interesting to compare them with other kinds of programs like that. Are students in a peer ministry program likely to be more committed to education and to graduation than students in a non-ministerial program, maybe people in a peer counseling program?
Okay, so you'd be trying to judge what benefit they derive from their participation. We could also ask the question of how effective they were.
Absolutely. In
trying to reach out to others. I know one of the theories I've had along this line is that I would like to see someone in charge of all of these peer ministers, or a couple of adult figures who would enter into very close personal contact with them. That is, who would sit down with them, have lunch with them once a month or something, and say, hey, did you visit your 5 students? Have you continued to follow up with them? Have you gotten much out of it? Or next time we get together for lunch, let's invite one of them with us here and see how they have liked the way you have reached out to them.
Could do it by questionnaire, in which we got to this whole question of effectiveness, or by interview, as you're suggesting. Then with your peer ministry, I think we'd have to somehow add in something about the ministry proper. How are the effects here different from a program that were purely a lay peer counseling program? What parts of theology or of belief or of religion would we want to see somehow promulgated? Or can we differentiate it in some way that would be meaningful?
Very good,
How would we try and measure, rather than, since neither of us are Lutheran, could we assume the minute that the program you described in the Lutheran school was occurring in a Catholic school?
Yes.
What would you want to see promulgated in a religious sense here?
That's right. I mean, that would be another way to analyze this whole thing from a theological viewpoint. And one of the first things that I would say is that these peer ministers would have to have a theological orientation that would tell them that they are not to be proselytizing or pushing religion down people's throats, that God is very capable of saving people without them, that they are not now young messiahs running around thinking that they have to save the world, and they are not to look down on people who don't respond to them and who refuse to participate in the service or don't join up with the religious group. So there's a theological presupposition there about how salvation works in our mind, that God saves people and peer ministers don't, and that God can save people who are not members of the church or a particular religious group. So we would give them a very broad-minded, open attitude towards salvation, and I think therefore we would hope that that would come through in their approach, that they wouldn't be compulsive, pushy, and trying to make people feel guilty if they don't come. Then out of that theological presupposition, we would attempt to avoid all of that. I think, too, working out of our Catholic tradition, we would expect them to be able to point out the values of worshiping together. That's an important value for us Catholics, and the Mass is the center point of our religious life in many ways, and we would expect them to be able to describe that well, or to tell others in simple terms what they get out of it. When they go to Mass, it's their time to worship, or they get a sense of fellowship, or there's good things that happen. That would be another
knowing
example.
you, those are good. Knowing you're not simply talking about attending Mass or attending confession. You're talking about the whole quality of the subjective religious experience and its impact on the personal and social growth of the student.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's very well put and very important. So we're not into just a formalism here by any means. Well, I think you directed me well there, Norm. We're going to run out of time on all of this. I might try to just go back over what we were trying to say here. We're talking about peer ministry in the context of a whole large self-help program that college students are involved in, and we're seeing that there is a growth in that kind of thing, and that there's various ways that it's carried on. And one of those I'm calling a ministry of presence or outreach. And it very often for students it's informal. It's just being a good listener, providing a shoulder to cry on, of just reaching out in a kind, open, generous kind of way. And then we're talking about more formal programs where people learn to do that. They learn communication skills, and they learn how to listen well and to do this prudently. All of it based on a sort of theological presupposition that it's good to share one's faith and to do it with prudence and care so you don't cram it down people's throat. Peer ministry is an important thing that's going on, and I believe it's an exciting topic.
You've been listening to Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Today, Father Bacik talked with Dr. Norman Gedan, who is director of the University Counseling Center at the University of Toledo. The topic of this week's Reflections was peer ministry, presence, and outreach. If you have any comments on today's show or suggestions for future programs, please write Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Minister, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio, 43606. Funding for this program was provided by the Catholic Communications Commission of the Diocese of Toledo.